Hi, welcome back. Let's finish setting up our development environment for Revit API with Python. In this lesson, I will show you how to install and configure pyCharm IDE so you can have Revit API Autocomplete when you code, which would be irreplaceable help in writing our scripts for Revit. We're going to start by installing Python and then pyCharm itself, and then we will configure it together. Let's start with Python. It doesn't matter which Python version you're going to use in pyCharm, because we're not going to run Revit API scripts from pyCharm. Also, many people have reached out to me that they experienced some issues when they try to create virtual environment in pyCharm with certain Python versions. If that's the case for you, try to install another Python version and see if that works. But I would recommend you to start with Python 2.7.18 because it gives you the least errors. So let's open Google and type download Python 2.7.18 and then select this official Python website. There are a bunch of installation files here, but I will download this installer for 32 and 64 bits. Then run this installer as usual and install your Python. Also, make a note here where you are installing your Python. It might be useful when we configure pyCharm later. And once this is done, the first step is complete. Next, let's download and install pyCharm. Let's go to Google and type pyCharm and then look for a website from JetBrains. On this website, look for the download button, and at the time of recording, it's right here in the middle. Then there are two versions available here, but you'll be more than fine with free community version. So download that. Then run the pyCharm installer, and on this page select all the text boxes, especially we're interested in these two. And then we can click on install. When installation is complete, it will recommend you to reboot your pyCharm, but I think you can also reboot it after this lesson. I already have pyCharm installed, so when I open it, this menu is gonna look a little bit different. And if you just installed it, you should see a welcome screen like this. In either way, just look for a button to create a new project. Normally, project is going to be our custom pyRevit extension, but we will create it from scratch in the next video. So it doesn't matter where you place it for now. I will just place mine somewhere on the desktop. Then we can create a new virtual environment for our project, or we can select already existing one if you have one. Virtual environment allows us to pre-configure Python environments for different purposes. We could install all necessary packages globally, but that would clutter our development space and might lead to bugs across different Python projects. Imagine that you have a container that you would use for Revit API development. You would put all necessary stuff like packages, references, stubs for autocomplete, so this container is dedicated for working on Revit API. And then you decide that you want to create a website, and you would need another container with completely different set of packages inside of it. And then when you create a new project, you can just grab the right container with all the right packages pre-installed already. So let's go back to pyCharm and actually create virtual environment. There are different options here, but I will stick to virtual environment. Next, let's change the path where this environment will be stored. Trying to find a secure location like app data or documents, somewhere where it's far from being touched accidentally. I'll open File Explorer and I'll create a folder for my virtual environments in app data. And let's call this folder pyCharm environment, so we can place multiple there. Then let's copy the path and go back to pyCharm. I'm gonna place it here in the location, and then I wanna make sure that I create a separate folder for Revit API 23, because we're gonna have multiple environments for different Revit versions. Then in base interpreter, we need to select the right Python version. There might be multiple versions available for you, so make sure you select the right version that we installed earlier. Also, if for some reason you cannot find the right Python version, click here on the three dots to manually select Python interpreter. Go to the folder where you have installed your Python and then select python.exe file in that folder. Then we don't need to inherit any global site packages and make sure that it's available to all projects. It will be easier to select it. And lastly, we have an option to create a main.py welcome script, and we don't need to do this. And when this project is created, this is going to be the main pyCharm interface. Here on the left side, you can see you have the root folder structure, the list of references to external libraries, and scratches where you can create Python scripts and test some smaller snippets. To create a file or a folder, right-click on this folder right here, and then select Directory or New File. Let's call it temporary.py, and inside we can test if Python interpreter and default autocomplete actually works. I'll try to import here OS module, and then we're gonna test if our auto suggestion actually work. Write OS and put a dot, and you can see right away it gives me a few suggestions like path, so default autocomplete works just fine. And now before we start configuring our Revit API autocomplete, I'm gonna try to import Autodesk module, and you can see that there are no suggestions whatsoever. So let's add Revit API Stubs to make it work. First of all, we need to download Revit API Stubs. I'm going to leave a link somewhere in the description where you can download a zip file containing multiple Revit API stubs. This way we can create multiple virtual environments for different Revit API versions. So once you download them, we need to place them somewhere secure. I will place them in the same folder we created in the app data for our environments. Place it here, and then we can open it, and you can select which folder do you need for your Revit version. Since I'm working in Revit 2023, I'm gonna select that one, so we can reference it in our pyCharm interpreter. And this will make it possible for Revit API Autocomplete to work. To add references, we need to open interpreter settings. We can either go to File, click on Settings, then in here select your project, and then you can click on Python Interpreter. Or could use a much simpler approach. Click here on the bottom right, and then click on Interpreter Settings. So this is your interpreter, which you created with your Python. Normally, you would add some packages here, so you have the autocomplete and they also work. But remember, since we're not going to run any scripts from pyCharm, we don't really need any packages. Instead, we need to click on here and click Show All to see all available virtual environments. And right here, you're supposed to have all your virtual environments. At the moment, I have only one, which is Revit API 23, which we created together with this project. Then when you have the right interpreter selected, we can click right here on this icon which says Show Interpreter Paths. And these are the paths that are available to our Python environment. There are a few paths to Python libraries and a few paths to our scripts. So now we need to click on this plus sign, and then we can paste here the path that we copied for our Revit API Stubs. If I open it, you can see inside of this folder there's Autodesk and pyRevit Labs. So click on OK. And now this is supposed to give us the Revit API Autocomplete. Before we close this menu, let's also add autocomplete for your pyRevit. But first of all, we need to find the pyRevit masters folder. So open File Explorer. Normally it's placed in App Data, and you can access it with this syntax. And then look in here for pyRevit master folder, which I can see right here. Inside of it there is pyRevit library, and we need to copy path to this folder. And then, same as before, click on plus sign, paste this path, and add it here. Also, if you cannot find your pyRevit master folder in the app data, sometimes it also gets installed to C drive or to programs files, so you might need to have a look around to see where it's located. Once it's complete, we can try and actually see if our Revit API autocomplete works. I'm gonna write the regular line from Autodesk, Revit DB import everything. Then we're gonna try to use filtered element collector, and there are plenty of auto suggestions everywhere, so our Revit API autocomplete actually works. Now let's also test if pyRevit autocomplete works as well. We're gonna import forms from pyRevit, and then in forms we're gonna try to use alert. And you can see it gives me a bunch of different auto suggestions, but also we can reference documentation of these classes. In pyCharm, if you hold Ctrl and click on Q, it's gonna open the doc string where you can learn more about how to use this form. And if you click Ctrl Q again, it's gonna open it as a side menu. In here you can see there's different parameters and it describes what we actually have to provide. And sometimes you can get some examples. So our autocomplete for Revit API works, but we're not done yet. Let's create multiple virtual environments for different Revit versions. Because for now we created it for Revit API 2023, and let's create one for Revit API 2021. And it's quite simple. First we need interpreter settings, and you already know that we can click here, interpreter settings. Then we're gonna click here and show all. And as I said earlier, this is a list of all your virtual environments. So I'm gonna click here on the top to add new interpreter. Then, same as before, we need to select a Python version and location. And let's place it in the same place. So in the path, I'm gonna select pyCharm environments. And right here is our environment for Revit API 2023. And we want to create a new directory for Revit API 2021. Now select this folder. And when you select any folder here, make sure that this folder is empty or you just created it. Now click on OK. We don't need to inherit any global site packages. And this is everything that we can actually select here. Then click on OK. Then same as before, we can open interpreter paths. And in here, we need to add Revit API Stubs for 2021 and then pyRevit library as well. Then when you finished, click on OK to close all of these menus. And now here on the bottom, you can see which environment is actually active. At the moment, I have Revit API 2021. And if I click here, I can switch at any time to Revit API 2023. Now I'm going to test and see if it's different Revit API versions actually. I'm going to use the same class, which had differences in 21 and 23 versions. I'm going to write filter string rule. And here on the top, you can see that it asks for 4 arguments. It asks for value provider, evaluator, rule string, and case sensitive. Now let's remove it, and we're going to switch to Revit API 2023. Now I'm going to take exactly the same class. But this time, if you look in the API, it's supposed to be 3 arguments. And it's exactly value provider, evaluator, and rule string. As you can see, the 4th argument became obsolete in Revit 2023. Alright, that brings us to the end of this lesson. We have successfully set up Revit API Autocomplete in pyCharm, and we installed all necessary Revit plugins in the previous video. And now you're ready to move to the exciting part. It's time for you to create your own custom extension for Revit, and I can promise you that it's much simpler than you might expect. So I will see you there.